Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Extension Horses How to Facebook Live series. We are so glad you can join us today on this week of Thanksgiving. My name is Krishona Martinson. I'm a member of extensionhorses.org and also the equine extension specialist at the University of Minnesota. And I am so incredibly excited to be joined today with Taylor Fabus. And look, she's coming from her barn. I'm in my boring office, the command control center, with my multiple screens of devices. But we're so excited to have Taylor join us today. She has a wealth of experience on managing horses that are hard keepers or thin. And both her and I guess, have had the privilege of having own some of our horses for a very long time. And the reality is eventually we kind of all get there. So Taylor, do you want to take a few minutes as people are jumping on to just introduce yourself and your adorable helpers today?
Yeah.
Talk about your education, your position, your career path, and your current responsibilities at Michigan State.
Sure can. Okay, so hi everybody, Taylor Fabus. Like Krishona said, I work at Michigan State University Extension, and I mean, let's just elephant in the room here. This is Patty. Hi, sir. And he is not what we're talking about today. This fella is not a hard keeper, but we do have some examples of them today. So I thought I'd join from the barn since it's 2020 and I'm at home anyways. So that's more fun than just looking at my office wall, and my office is my bedroom. So anywho, guys, so how did I get where I'm at? So let me tell you a little bit about my position at MSU. So I have a majority extension appointment at MSU. And 85% of the work that I do is in outreach and extension. And the audience that I serve are youth. So I do most of my work through Forage programming. I'm sure that's familiar to many of you. But I do also have a small teaching appointment in the Department of Animal Science at MSU. And I teach horse classes, like intro horse classes. I also coach the horse judging team. So I might sneak in a bit of confirmation on accident because it's just in my blood. But I also have a boarding farm at home. And so I am lucky enough to be able to bring some live horses to you. Woo. And while Krishona is being super high tech, I'm very low tech and I just have my iPhone. So how did I come to this position? Well, I got my bachelor's and my master's at Michigan State University in animal science. Although I'll tell you my master's degree is actually, I took a lot more education courses and I focused a lot on how learners learn because that's really kind of what gets me excited about learning. So I love learning more about the human aspect of things. And then that led me to a role in extension and teaching, and I just love it. So I've been in this role for a decade now, which is crazy to me because I feel like I'm still new to it, but I'm new because I'm learning every day. So in my work and in my studies at MSU, I have learned a lot about feeding horses, but I'll tell you where I learned the most is owning the boarding farm that we own and operate as a family. One of our favorite things is getting a thin horse in and getting it to a healthy weight. And we've learned lots of tips and tricks along the way.
Well, awesome, Taylor. So you must have been 12 when you started your job. We'll just go
right.
with that.
That's right. Right.
So, and again, I think it is really important that, most of us with extensionhorses.org, not only do we have the university and the educational background, but we also have the personal background of managing horses, whether it's on a boarding farm or just privately. So first of all, like you said, Patty is not a hard keeper, but how do you define a horse that is a hard keeper? I think it's a term that's thrown around a lot, but what are maybe some definitions behind that term?
Yeah, so great question. And I just thought I'd mention, did you realize we were doing this talk on Thanksgiving week? Like the week of overindulgence of foods. I found that funny. So Patty, like I said earlier, not a hard keeper. He's what we call an easy keeper because it is easy to keep weight on him and maintain his weight. Now we have some other horses for a variety of reasons that are hard keepers, and that just means the opposite. It takes a lot of work to maintain their weight. And that, like I said, it can be all sorts of different reasons. Krishona alluded to them, some of them already. Age, right? If you think about humans, it's much the same. So whether they're super young and growing, that could be a reason why they're a hard keeper, or if they're very old, that might, it might be more difficult for them to maintain their weight. And there's about a million reasons in between those two that can cause it. And we have an example of a horse here, not necessarily a hard keeper necessarily. We haven't had him long enough to determine that. He just came very thin. So we're kind of, to begin with, treating him like a hard keeper, and what we might do to get his body condition score up to where we'd like it.
Yeah, I think that those are all great. And especially with you and I being in a cold climate, sometimes just the cold weather can be hard on horses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just maintaining body temperature is actually one of the biggest caloric demands for us or horses or any mammal. So trying to get their calories up, especially in those really cold climates, so that they can stay warm will help.
And just to remind people, I have my multiple screens here in my little command center. I have the questions that we have received so far on my phone, and I'm also monitoring my other screen on the Facebook page. So if, oh, somebody's getting a good brush down, yes. So if you have questions, make sure you ask them in the comment section, and we will do our best to address them at that time. So Taylor, one of the questions we did receive on the Facebook page was, a lot of times as horses age, maybe their teeth or their dentition becomes poor, and maybe that horse can no longer eat long-stemmed forage, and maybe they start to lose weight because of that. So do you have recommendations for hard keeping horses that maybe have really poor dentition or are no longer able to chew hay?
Okay, that's great, because that is going, a lot of older horses will fall into that category. And you bring up a good point. If you have a horse that is a poor doer, thin for whatever reason, this horse has been at our farm for about a month, and he came super thin. Let's see if I can turn the camera the correct way. And that was the first thing that the new owner did, is had a dentist look at him, had a equine veterinarian and dentist look at his teeth, look at his overall health. So that's probably something that we'll bring up again later. But before you just start throwing a bunch of food at them, you need to make sure that they are healthy, that they have the teeth that can chew that food and then digest it, and there's not some underlying health issues, whether it's a parasite load or stomach ulcers, or I mean, there's all sorts of different things. So do that. And then we have a guy at our barn. And when I say guy, I mean a horse. He's an old fella, and he has difficulty chewing the long stem forage like Krishona is talking about. So what does he get? He gets, let's see, Alfalfa Cubes. Okay. So these are, and the nice thing about these are super readily available at like any Tractor Supply store. And what we do with his cubes is we soak them. So they don't necessarily have to be soaked if they're, you know, small enough and if the horse has good teeth. But if we're already talking about a horse that doesn't have good teeth, we really soak these into basically a mash. I'll give you an idea of how much water. Okay, so we have this 2-gallon scoop, and he gets a half a gallon of the alfalfa cubes, and the rest of it we fill with water. So they really absorb a ton of water. Now we have another horse. Let me find her stuff. She just, a similar issue, but it's not a teeth issue. It's just we want to provide her with a bit more calories, and she went for alfalfa pellets. I don't know where they are, and I'll find them in just a second. We help me find Maisie's alfalfa pellet. Are you sure? But they are basically the same product, but in a pellet, so they don't have to be soaked. Found them. Here we go. And I'll just get a little handful so you guys can see. Totally the same product, but it's in a pelletized version and doesn't have to be, but could be soaked. And so those are really good options. Those are really good options too, guys, if you don't own your boarding farm. And also, in addition to owning our boarding farm, my husband grows our hay. So we're pretty spoiled. We have everything from third cutting alfalfa to first cutting grass and everything in between pretty much. But if you're like I was just 4 or 5 years ago at a boarding farm, and you can't just purchase hay or store hay. That doesn't work for you. I had a horse that needed some weight put on, and I did alfalfa cubes for him. So it was really easy for that farm manager to include that in his concentrates with their hay that was definitely safe and healthy for all the other horses, just not my hard keeper at the time. So, so that's a really good option.
All right, well, that's awesome, Taylor. And another thing I have seen is you and I both also show horses different disciplines, but during the summer months, sometimes that soaked alfalfa cubes, the horses like them, and people will use that as a way to try to keep a horse hydrated during that summer show season, or even when you're on the road with them. It's a good way to get water into the horse as well.
Oh, that's a really good idea, because even a thirsty horse, if you present them with a bucket of water, they aren't going to drink, but they'll eat. That's a really good idea. I don't know. Yeah. I think I've heard that, but I've never put that into practice. So
yeah. So and I think you mentioned it. So another question, and again, I'm watching multiple screens for questions here. So again, ask away and we'll get to them.
We won't make up answers, guys. We'll be honest with you.
Yeah. So what other precautions do you take with these hard keepers? And you mentioned when you get a hard keeper in, the first thing you do is you have a dental exam and you have a veterinarian do a basic exam. What are some of the things that they are looking for? What are some of the things that you have seen some of these harder keepers kind of present with? Like, what are some of the main issues that you've seen?
You know, one of the biggest issues that we found is actually more of a dominance issue, a personality issue. So if horses are big wimps, right? They're not going to necessarily fight for their food as much as they should. And the same can be said on the reverse. If you have a really heavy horse that is an alpha, they might be just getting all the food if horses are fed in groups. So honestly, that's been one of the most successful, easiest thing to do right off the bat, is just to make sure that they are separated during feeding time, especially if you're giving them grain or concentrates, so that they are getting everything that you have designated for them. So I'd say that that's one of the first things. And I'd let the vet do the health examination, just make sure that everything is going good. Hi. And that's what happened to Gus here first before we started throwing feed to him, because you guys can Google it. But there is something called refeeding syndrome, where if a horse is emaciated, you can't just give them a buffet and expect things to go well. Their body has been accustomed to starvation for a period of time, and it's not quite ready to get large amounts of food. So you do have to feed them small amounts over time to kind of build up their digestive tract. What other things? Is there something you're thinking of, Krishona, that I'm missing?
No,
rambling.
No, and Taylor, I think you're absolutely right. The first thing is to make sure they're current on vaccines. Do the dental examination, make sure you do a fecal egg count and deworm appropriately. But one thing I hadn't thought of was just the hierarchy. And there is a lot of research to support that, just like people, there are some horses that just will not fight for their food or their place in line, even if they're hungry. So that's really a key recommendation, I think.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight something that you kind of said, but you kind of quietly said it. So you said do a fecal egg count and then, check the parasite load. So that's something that pretty much I think every veterinarian is quite comfortable doing. So check with your veterinarian. But you don't necessarily just want to throw dewormers at your horse, assuming that they have a parasite load, because that can lead to resistance of those drugs, right? So we do that every year. Everybody on our farm gets a fecal egg count in the spring, and some farms do it in the fall as well. But that just lets us know what's our parasite load on the farm overall, but also those individual horses, so that we can treat them appropriately. And it's been really quite useful for us. So I definitely recommend that. That's a good one that I had forgotten about.
Yeah, and Taylor, the same thing. So right now I'm currently managing 4 mares on my farm, and I also do annual fecal egg counts, and only one of my horses is ever high, but she is actually quite high for whatever reason. So she's defined as a shedder, where the other 3 have never even been in a range where they would need deworming. Obviously there are other things that we look for, but yeah, it's very, very interesting to have that done. So a question we have is, the hierarchy thing. It's all fun and games to say separating a horse, but what if your horse is in a large pen of 5 or 6 horses and there is no way to separate them at feeding time?
So our setup is not that way. So we do have a group of pasture boarded horses at our farm. So not everybody has a stall. Obviously a stall. Oh, red. Sorry guys. Let me go take care of this horse real quick. Krishona, will you talk?
Yes. Yep, Taylor. So one thing that I think we can do with horses that are in a herd situation is they do have feeding bags. So I have seen people that actually will place a feeding bag on the horse, and that way the horse can eat and the other horses maybe don't see that horse is eating. But again, put the grain into a feeding bag, attach it to the horse. Also, sometimes it does take more time and labor, and you might not be at the farm, but you could simply take the horse out of the pen, have a feed pan, and then feed them on the ground while holding them, which isn't ideal, but it's something you could do. So Taylor, I hope everything's fine. I also help.
Fine. He just like panicked and pulled and got out of the cross ties, and he just walked to a stall. So we're fine. But for a minute when he was leaning back, I was like, what are you about? That was so 2020, right?
That's 2020. So I had just suggested
the feed bag on the halter, and that was genius. Yes, that is absolutely. But we do have, everybody gets fed in feed pans. We just happen to be lucky enough to have 6 different turnouts. So everybody goes in a different turnout. But the feed bag or the holding the horse while they eat in the feed pan, you're so smart. This is why we do this as a team, not just one person.
Well, and really, Taylor, there aren't really great options. And I know that a lot of people are in that position where they don't have a lot of control over how their horses are managed, and they're in large groups because horses are social animals and they tend to do well. The other thing is sometimes larger facilities maybe will have a hard keeping pen and an easy keeping pen, or a mare pen and a gelding pen, or a dominant pen and a submissive pen, however you want to describe it. But sometimes you just don't have a lot of good options.
Yeah, and let's say that you had 5 horses, and one was the alpha. Maybe don't worry so much about separating all 5. Maybe just the one alpha needs to be removed from the group during feeding, and the other 4 will be just fine. So that might make your life a little bit easier too, is just, take out the one problem child, or the one really submissive horse is the one that needs to be removed, rather than worrying about the 4 that can figure it out pretty well.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion as well. So you had mentioned that your husband is a farmer and supplies your hay, which is a wonderful thing to have.
A luxury, yes.
A luxury. So we get a lot of questions on alfalfa, and I think some people love alfalfa and some people think they can't feed alfalfa to a horse. So do you maybe want to talk about, when it comes to forages, some of the better options that you have seen for horses that can chew, maybe some of the better hay types, and maybe touch a little bit on the benefits and the drawbacks of alfalfa?
Sure. So I have wandered out to the other part of our barn that contains our hay, so we can have some real live examples right behind us, which I believe includes some pure alfalfa, and it does. So I'll grab that. So I would guess that the reason that some people say the alfalfa is not necessary is just because most horses don't require the amount of energy and nutrients that alfalfa provides. Not that it's unhealthy for a horse in any way, but it's just too rich, people might say, right? Sometimes when we get really, really rich alfalfa, we call that dairy cow hay. So think about the caloric demand that a lactating dairy cow would be under. That's the kind of animal that needs really rich alfalfa. So most of our horses do not require alfalfa. Let me see. I'll just show you over here. So here's a flake of our alfalfa sitting on a round bale of first cutting mix. So you can see even just the color difference here. We have a couple horses. So we have one 32-year-old gelding who's still got great teeth, and he's actually a pretty good weight. but he is very picky. He'll waste any hay that is not primo. So he gets a couple flakes of this, and then I have a yearling that gets a flake of this and some grass hay, because you think about the needs, the protein needs, and just the maintenance requirements of those two horses. They require some protein, and then, like I talked about, the personality of Mr. Dudley, he will refuse anything that is not the best. So otherwise, I would say that 90% of our horses, we have 20 horses on the farm, just to give you an idea of how many we have, do really, really good on this hay right behind me. And this is, I'm going to turn my camera around. This is a second cutting pure grass. Okay, so this is what most of our horses get in the stalls. It's got plenty of nutrients for them to maintain their body condition scores. It's very palatable. It's very soft. Actually, one of the harder keepers on our barn, or in our barn, enjoys this, and he eats this really well, rather than sometimes alfalfa can get stemmier, and he doesn't do as well with that. And then here, now that I have the camera turned around, I'll show you what the first cutting looks like. So not as yummy. You can see it's yellow. I would warn you guys that don't be alarmed at the color first off, okay? So as long as it is minimal dust, doesn't have any mold whatsoever, peel inside the bale and see how it looks on the inside. I'm not going to make a complete mess so that I don't have a very angry husband. But the outside of a bale can often get sun faded, but it does not mean that the energy or the nutritional value of this bale is poor by any means. And then one other hay I could show you is, this is a first cutting alfalfa. So you can see that it is quite a bit stemmier than our second and third cutting over here. So just something to look at. So it really is, we're fortunate. Not every barn is fortunate enough to have a variety of hay types. That's why you might have to control things a little bit more with the concentrate portion of their diet. Because if my husband was not a hay farmer, we would just have this grass hay. There would be really no need for us to have all the other stuff. And we would say, someone that brought a yearling, that if your horse needs a good amount of alfalfa, I would suggest bringing some Alfalfa Cubes. So if you've heard something similar like that from your boarding farm, they are not crazy. It's just the fact that they have limited storage, and they can't necessarily they can't be like a short order cook, right? Has your mom ever told you that? I'm not a short order cook, right? This is what's for dinner and you're getting it. So kind of the same idea. We use the first cutting, by the way. That's a great turnout hay because it allows the horses to kind of munch on it all day long. If we gave something like this in the stalls, I think that we'd have more waste than they would actually eat it. But outside, they're bored. Things are good, and they finish this up. So don't be afraid of alfalfa, but also don't be afraid of just grass. And don't be afraid of something that's got a little bit of discoloration, as long as it's still got some minimal dust and no mold in it.
Yeah, and I would agree, Taylor. I think a good quality grass hay is definitely the most versatile, because like you said, it really can be fed to all different classes of horses, and you can fill in any energy or nutrient gaps with a concentrated grain product. But like you said, alfalfa it's a legume. It is more energy dense, more crude protein. And like you said, your yearling that is growing and has more demands, or an older horse that just has become a harder keeper, has greater energy demands, so it works well. So great advice there. So we talked about the cubes, the pellets, the different types of hays. So what other products or feeds have you found successful in managing these hard keepers?
Let's go to my grain room, shall we? Okay, so there's all sorts of different stuff. I don't mean this to be product endorsements, okay, guys? These are just what we've tried and what has worked. I'm sure there's other stuff out there that's amazing, but this is not an ad, and I'm not sponsored. So one thing that we have found, if we're talking about top dressing your current concentrate, we have used with quite a bit of success. Let me turn this around so y'all can see the label. This is a product from Purina, and it's called Amplify. Okay. Now, this may look like we have a ton of it, but we actually save these containers and put other stuff in them because they're so awesome. So that is pretty readily available and fairly cost effective. I want to say about $40 a month if you're feeding per their recommendations. Now,
And Taylor,
Krishona,
is that a fat supplement, or what is Amplify for those that might not be familiar?
You're fine. It is a high fat supplement that is a rice bran product. Let me see how else they describe it. Flax, yeah. So 30% fat from rice bran, flaxseed, and vegetable oils. So it's a really safe feed. I'm trying to remember how Carrie Williams would describe this feed. I think it was like a cool fat rather than a hot. I'm not sure. But Carrie Williams, who is our colleague, who is a nutritional expert, unlike myself, I'm just from the School of Hard Knocks in nutrition. She said that something that's like a rice bran product is really, really good and safe way to add fat into your horse's diet. So pretty much everything I'm going to suggest to you is in that family. It's just different products. So that's Amplify. And like Krishona and I have spent a great deal of time talking about, we much prefer you to try to balance out these energy requirements with a high quality forage first, and not just go straight for concentrates, kind of solving your problem, if that makes sense. Another thing that we feed is, I don't know that I have a bag of it, but I can show you what the product looks like, and then I'll go peek and see if we have a bag. Again, this is about 30% fat rice bran product. This is from Tribute, and it's called K Finish. And I will tell you, look, there we do have some. So K Finish comes in a big orange bag like that. All right. I will tell you from my experience, it's not quite as palatable for the horses as Amplify, but even the picky ones end up finishing it. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I just thought it was worth saying. Now you could think real simply, and one of the first ways to add fat to a diet is oil. So, and I mean that in the purest sense. So think quarter cup of corn oil or something, similar vegetable oil, and just top dress right on the grain. Works really well. I had someone explain it to me once, like it's the difference from going from baking all of your food to deep frying all of your food. So it's very palatable. The horses really tend to like it, and it just adds those calories pretty safely into the horse's diet. So those are a couple of things that we really like, in addition to, increasing the quality of forage and providing the alfalfa pellets or cubes. So, yeah.
So a question that we have is, it seems like all companies have senior grain products made for the senior horse. Do you have any? Well, so first of all, Taylor and I cannot recommend products. That's not our job. Our job is to provide information so that owners can choose what they want. So again, you've done a great job of, not endorsing, but the reality is you got to show what you feed. So Taylor, what are your thoughts on some of those senior products and how to feed them?
Okay, let me show you something right off the bat. So here we have, hey, I meant to turn the camera around so you don't have to see my face quite so closely. All right, guys, this is Purina Senior. You may recognize or see those little nuggets in there. Those little lighter colored nuggets are actually Amplify. Okay, so Amplify is just that high fat nugget portion of the Equine Senior. So I have so many different kinds of grain types, guys. Let me just show you something. Here is our grain board. Okay. I told you earlier that I wasn't a short order cook, but turns out we are. So everybody has a different diet, and that's because we let each owner make their decisions. And we have 2 horses that are on Equine Senior that work really well for them. And it has the Amplify in it, and you can even top dress with it as well. And then I would definitely, guys, become familiar with the back of the bag. Okay. Then you can really compare products to each other. All right. And then they'll often even have a feed tag as well on them. But if you're going to buy a prepackaged product like that, then one of the nice things about it is the consistency of the product. So between bag to bag, where we actually get the majority of our feed from an elevator. And so it's custom mixed for us, but there is more of a human element where there can be some differences between our batches. We work really hard, and we work with an elevator that works really hard as well, so that there isn't, but that is one of the things that people say is their favorite part of the prepackaged grain is consistency. Let's see, I don't have a bag of it, but I'll show you another feed that is a senior feed that's kind of interesting. I'd never seen it before, but I had a boarder come, and this is what she feeds her horses. And her horse is a senior horse. So again, I don't know do I know the name of it? Triple Crown Senior is the name of it. Again, not an endorsement. This is just for educational purposes. What's really interesting to me is this is so molassesy, guys, which is probably not an actual word. But we are in a heated grain room right now. I mean, it's not heated very much, but it's heated. And this stuff gets hard to scoop up because it gets so hard. There's so much molasses. But what there also is in there, I hope this is coming through not too fuzzy. But there's
great, Taylor.
Okay, good. There's beet pulp in there. So beet pulp is a high fiber food that can also be added. Let me see if I can just take a little so you can see the individual. And then there's a pellet in there, which the texturized feed, it's going to be, guys, probably very similar to so many of the other senior feeds. They've just all got their own little twist and element to it. And so that's Triple Crown Senior. This is definitely, I'd say, because of the amount of molasses, very palatable. But it is difficult. I would caution you on that one. Oh, look, there's my kiddo. I'd caution you on that one if you have a very cold storage area, because it will be very hard to scoop out. Also, with the amount of molasses in a feed, you have to be careful with those insulin resistant horses and similar things. So yeah. Hopefully
well, I think your feed room is awesome. You have you are well represented there. And
yeah. Oh my gosh, we have so much more. I have tribute seniority here as well. Another senior. I'm telling you, our favorite thing is the old horses and the skinny ones that we need to get fat, because we love doing that.
Well, that is absolutely awesome. But you kind of mentioned one thing, and I think it's worth repeating, that the turning the bag over and becoming familiar with the back of the bag is incredibly important. So a lot of times people that are feeding a senior product will see the recommendation for 8 to 12 pounds, for example, a day, and they'll do the math and they'll say, wow, I can't afford it. I can only afford to feed X amount of pounds. But the thing that people need to remember is that feed is balanced to meet the horse's requirement fed at that rate. So if you're shorting your horse, you really have to reevaluate your numbers and think about the economics. So I think your suggestion to become familiar with the back of the bag is really, really important, to people often overlook it.
Trying to bite me.
Oh,
always hungry.
Oh, Patty. So Taylor, oh, everybody's saying they very organized. They really enjoyed looking at your feed room. So,
oh my gosh, thank you.
So I think, again, if you guys have more questions, you're doing a great job. You can put them in there. I have my multiple screens here that I'm monitoring. Our last question is, do you just have any final suggestions or tips or tricks for people that are really struggling to put weight on a horse or manage these thinner, harder keeping horses?
Yeah, so first thing, some of this will be repetitive, and I think that's okay, especially for those that weren't able to join right at the beginning. First things first is have your animal looked at by a veterinarian and an equine dentist. Sometimes those are one and the same, but not always, to make sure that they're able to masticate their food and digest it appropriately. And also talk about saving money. Like, there's no point in giving your horse food that they cannot digest. So that's really important to do that overall. We'd say that for pretty much anything. Is your horse acting suddenly kind of crazy under saddle? Like, is it because they're not feeling good, right? So make sure they're feeling good first, and then start to adjust things accordingly. Another thing that we mentioned was talking about the hierarchy of the feeding. So if you have the luxury to feed separately, that's great, but not everybody does. So pay attention to those horses that may be really submissive, kind of be the wimps in the group, and make sure that they are getting opportunity to eat. I would say one of the absolute best things for a horse is to graze and to be out on pasture. But guess who doesn't have that luxury? This girl, okay?
Especially in the winter.
Yes. Especially in the winter. But we pretty much just have, and really a lot of times in Michigan, we have more horses on a piece of land than can sustain those horses with forage alone. So we have to feed hay every single day. So just because there's a little bit of grass out there, don't assume that the horses aren't also needing additional forage, especially if you have multiple horses in a smaller area. That's one of the reasons why Patty, who's trying to, nibble on me, is doing so well. He's so round. He's doing just fine. He's got his winter weight on, but that's because he's got some goofy allergy issues. Of course he would, because he's my horse and he wants to be high maintenance. So he gets to be out on our one grass pasture, and let me tell you, it's done his body good. So, and really, grass, you're going to find very few horses that aren't able to digest that and masticate it and things like that, unless they have like some, incisor issues or something like that. So if you have the opportunity for grass, that's a really safe way to introduce healthy forage to the horse. Slowly though, you don't want to just throw a horse that's not used to yummy grass out on a big thick pasture, because you can have some real issues metabolically with founder and such. So I just wanted to mention that. Increase the quality of forage is something that we always go to before we try to throw a bunch of grain at them, because like Krishona mentioned, those grains are balanced for certain amounts. You're not supposed to give a ton of them. You can have some issues potentially with messing up the pH in the stomach and potentially causing some ulcers. But either way, a ton of grain, that's not how horses' digestive tracts were designed, right? They're supposed to have lots of small meals throughout the day, mostly with forage. So try to adjust the forage first before you really focus on concentrates. And then the other thing that we do first is top dress whatever concentrate they're getting, whether that's with a fat supplement product that's like a rice bran or a vegetable oil, or the actual vegetable oil. So it really kind of depends on corn prices too, I would mention. If corn prices are really low, corn oil is really low, and you can get the great big old jug from Sam's Club and put that on. And I'm gonna show you guys something real quick that we have a mirror on a coconut oil. So that's just a similar product. It's a fatty acid formula for horses. Okay. But you can buy these pumps right on Amazon and figure out how many pumps is a quarter cup. Normally it's 2 pumps, but it depends on your pump. But this is definitely the way to administer more accurately and less messy your oil. So yeah, I think I covered the main things I wanted to.
That was a great recap, Taylor. So and again, we have a few minutes. So the question is, my horse tends to like a senior product, and then after about a month refuses to eat, so we end up switching. Any suggestions around that, and maybe just the caution of not making hard switches, but gradual changes if you do have to switch a feed for whatever reason?
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to know the pickiest horse on the farm? This fat boy. Okay. So we have another horse hollering. So we have actually had to, luckily for us, he's not a hard keeper, so it hasn't been too detrimental. But we have to really pay attention to the types of food that he does eat. So he does not like a dry pellet. He wants something that's got more moisture in it, and those he tends to finish. So, really pay attention to your horse's habits. Which ones are they just consistently after a month not liking anything at all? Or are there some that they seem to like a little bit more? And then if you do have to make some changes, super inconvenient for you, I know. But as long as they continue to eat it, then, maybe mix it up every once in a while. But like Krishona said, you do not all or nothing with horses. So they are creatures of habit. Their digestive tracts do really well when things are fed consistently. So if you do have to change things, change them gradually over. Anytime we get a new horse here at the farm, we want to know what they were fed before so that we can transition them onto anything new. We don't want to just make hard switches. Honestly, even with hay, you don't want to make a hard switch with the hay types either. So keep that in mind. And then something that you might want to try with your horse is a consistent top dress of like an oil. Maybe that will make the food more palatable, and then you wouldn't have to change the concentrate as much. Maybe, hopefully, they would like some vegetable oil, and that would make them stick with it, I hope. So best of luck.
Yeah, so we have another comment here, and this is a little bit on a separate topic, but I think it's really important to touch on, is that this individual, he likes to feed hay when they're on pasture. I think both also to extend the pasture supply, but also to help reduce sand colic. And I actually live on a very sandy piece of property in Minnesota. I'm on the Anoka Sand Plain, close to the Mississippi River. And our biggest thing is just not feeding anything on the ground so they have the chance of ingesting sand. So I don't know, Taylor, if you have any other thoughts or suggestions for just really, reducing any amount of sand that they could have in their diet.
Yeah, so I find it funny. I feel like Krishona and I are living like mirror lives in different states because we too live on, we call it a gravel pit. It works out for drainage purposes really, really well. Once you get about 10, 12 inches in, we have beautiful sand and our drainage system works pretty well. But with all that sand comes issues like potentially sand colic. It was something that we were actually really worried about when we like the first year we did the fecal egg count. They also tell us how much sand is in the manure. And we were quite surprised at those levels that they were all very low. We had one horse, and it was actually a pony who was probably just picking up, she's like a little vacuum cleaner, right? She just eats anything. So that kind of made sense. But it hasn't been an issue because the only reason we know that is because we do those fecal egg counts. So I would suggest that, first of all, doing those tests and see if your vet can also let you know about sand. But you'll notice up in the corner there, I'm not sure if you can see it, we do have a product called Sand Clear. I'm sure there's other similar products, but we have from time to time had to provide that to a horse that had a higher sand load. Some other things that you can do if you do need to feed outside and you don't really have any grass buffer between the hay and your sand is even just put like a rubber mat down and they can eat off the rubber mat, or have an elevated hay feeding system, like a bale feeder or something like that. But the important thing is that you just keep tabs on it. However you're able to do that to make sure that it doesn't become an issue. And the fecal test is how we're able to do that.
Awesome. Well, again, I don't see any other questions in my other screen here. And okay. Taylor, you have just been absolutely fabulous. So yay. I can't thank you enough. I just want to thank everybody for joining Taylor and myself on the How to Care for Hard Keepers. Again, this is a monthly series on extensionhorses.org. And we hope you will join us next month. Oh, and her little helper.
I had my helper helping in the background.
That was nice. Well, thank you for your help, Caroline. And I really just, it was so fun to be in your barn, and especially in this time where we're all home, staying safe. It's nice to kind of peek into other people's barns and see their horses. And Taylor, happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you as well. We might have to extend this into a series where we show people around our barns. That might be fun.
Yeah, that'd be so. But yeah, mine be real quick. So
that's okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye, guys. Thanks for watching.